Why did God selectively judge Israel so much? Probably because the people that were writing down about their history, the people that were writing about the history of Yahweh, was the people that lived in Israel. It's way more consistent to say that the reason that God is judging Israel so much is because the Israelites are the one recording them.
Now, if that person in there then freezes to death that winter because there's a blizzard, that's not on the landlord, because the person refused what the landlord had to offer.
It's funny that you're a deist, but you're kind of thinking in a way that most atheists think, which I think is very
I take the good with the bad. You kind of know my testimony a little bit as an ex-Christian. Do you remember the problems that I had with Christianity, which led to my departure?
Not too well. I don't remember them too well.
The first... Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
The first was supernatural. The supernaturalism. Hard for me to believe in supernatural miracles, divine revelation, and heaven and hell, and angels and demons and devils and gods. The other thing was problem of evil. I think problem of evil is a very serious issue, which ought to be tackled.
Okay. Well, let's do the problem of evil, because I can do the problem of evil. I love it. I don't think it's real. Okay. And I guess since I
by the way, before you go into this, I would love to hear. I'm also listening, by the way, because I actually have an issue with that problem as well. I just want to hear you discuss it with him. So.
Just if God is all powerful, if God is infinitely powerful and God is infinitely good, then why does He allow suffering and evil?
Okay.
Good question.
We'll start with this is an internal critique. So you're asking, why does God allow the Christian definition of evil?
Yep, sin, pretty much, a deprivation of God.
Cool. Okay, cool. All right, so that would negate suffering, because Christians don't believe suffering is necessarily evil.
Suffering, to an extent, the suffering that is caused by sin is the suffering that's at play.
Right, that would be the evil. That would be the evil bit. It wouldn't be suffering that's evil. It would be sin that's evil, and any suffering caused by sin would be evil.
Yeah,
but not suffering in it.
The example that I use is imagine one person making another person suffer because of their own pride. Like if I were to insult you, that would be emotionally suffering because I'm prideful.
Fair enough. Okay. So why does God allow sin? Okay, I'm sure you know the common Christian answer: free will. So why do you find that inadequate?
Because it is possible because God is infinitely powerful, that would mean that it is possible for Him to create a world where we still have free will, and we also still don't suffer or there's any evil. It is perfectly within His nature to do that.
How?
By preventing every sin, while also having free will take place.
So that no, he'd be violating free will if he prevented every sin.
Nope. Imagine when a car salesman directs you and persuades you into buying a specific car because it's the best and goodest car for you, or the best car that you could possibly use, or the best path that you could possibly go down is to buy this specific car. Right. God could do that. He wouldn't be violating our free will. Everything would still be under our own free choice.
Okay, so you're not saying he would prevent every sin. You're saying he would
you would
debate bro into not sinning?
Not exactly debate bro, but imagine I was gonna go rob a bank. It is perfectly, and I wanted to go rob a bank, and I was about to go do it. It is perfectly within God's nature to come down in human form and to stop me and to pull me aside and talk to me, and be like, "Hey, man, let me tell you why this is not a very good idea." And He's all-knowing, so He knows exactly what it would take for me to not sin, but He chooses not to.
Okay, so you're basically arguing that God could physically come down and stop people before they sin and be like, "Yo, this is a bad idea," etc., and tell them what they need to know to convince them not to do the thing.
Yep, there's plenty of other ways, but that's I like to use that example because God comes down in human form several times in the Bible.
Okay, how about this? Okay, let's say let's say humans collectively decided that they don't want God to do that.
Then God would know exactly what it would take to convince them or persuade them. Persuasion is not negating free will. He's not forcing them to do anything. I make that very clear.
Okay.
So God knows exactly what it would take to persuade everyone into understanding that he is doing what is best for them by persuading them into a certain
Right.
choice.
Yeah, but if that's how God wields if that's how God wields his omniscience, he would be cheating. Because even though I agree with you, persuasion is not a negation of one's free will. The reason it's not necessarily negation of free will for humans is because we're not all knowing. I don't know how specifically I can persuade you to, for example, concede this argument right now, because I don't know all the variables in your mind. God does.
Yep.
So if God were to do that, he actually would be circumventing your free will because he's persuading you specifically because he knows exactly how to prevent you from making a decision.
Why? Because you agree that persuasion is not negating free will.
It's not necessarily, but when at God's level of persuasion, it is because he's using persuasion specifically to stop people from making a choice, and he knows it will work. He's literally loopholing free will. He's quite literally doing it.
Because this was where I would tell you that you can't have it both ways. You can't say that God persuading people into doing things negates free will, or like it's because of his omniscience, when he does that several times in the Bible, comes down and persuades people or speaks to people in the form of a burning bush, when he wrestles with Jacob in the form of Jesus, or in this form of the storm with Job. Like he didn't. He definitely didn't negate anyone's free will by speaking to people.
That's true. Speaking to people doesn't negate their free will, but God does not invariably do the exact thing to convince someone absolutely. Usually, he convinces them enough so that a human would make a decision, and then he gives them room to be like, nah. Like for example, after convincing Moses with the burning bush, he gave Moses plenty of room to say nah, and Moses did say nah on multiple occasions. He even sinned against God to the point where he wasn't allowed to enter the promised land. He convinced Israel to follow him out of Egypt, but he gave them room to say nah. They said nah, so they died in the wilderness. So on and so forth. God doesn't just come and invariably persuade people, you wielding his omniscience in order to prevent them from making a decision.
Job.
Job? What about Job?
Job was going to be cursing against God. Well, not that he was going to, but he persuaded Job absolutely to that God is really all good and that God has done nothing wrong.
No, he didn't. After what happened to Job. No, Job already believed that. God was kind of just testing him at that point.
But there's nothing wrong with persuasion. I can persuade you into believing my argument. That doesn't mean I'm forcing you to believe my argument.
Well, yeah, but the difference is humans have such limited persuasive power that it has no effect on our free will.
And also the other side of that coin.
I agree.
The other side of that coin would be like, okay, then God can do exactly what you just said and leave a little bit of room for what was it? What is it that you said to say no to?
Yes. Say no.
Then let's say I want to go rob a bank. God could persuade me into robbing said bank, leave a little bit of room in my mind for doubt on whether or not I should or shouldn't do it, but I would still not commit sin nonetheless. And that was
God would never persuade you to do something against his essence, which is good.
Well, here's actually a biblical example. In Genesis 4, right, with Cain and Abel. Abel gets his offering accepted. Cain's offering is rejected. And then the Lord goes directly to Cain. Before Cain sins, he says, "Why are you angry?" said the Lord to Cain. "Why has your countenance fallen? If you do what is right, you will not be accepted. But if you refuse to do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires you, but you must master it." So he goes to Cain and gives him this speech. He's like, "Hey, I know you're feeling this way. I know you're angry. I know about all this, but you have to do what's right. You need to master yourself." And Cain was like, "No, I'm going to kill Abel anyway."
Yep. And
that's how God wields his persuasive power. He will make the argument. It's up to you to decide.
I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Is God all-knowing?
Yes.
Did God know what it would have taken to make it so that Cain did not commit a sin? Or did not murder Abel?
Yes, God knew how to invariably persuade Cain.
And so that means he chose not to. He chose not to tell him whatever it was. Then God is not all good.
Of course he is.
Do you hear yourself?
That's like saying I know what to do to manipulate my wife. Like I want my wife to do this, and I know what to do to push her buttons and to manipulate her into doing what I want.
That's
So I'm just going to do that thing. So that's not love. That's
we've,
called manipulation.
the difference
So
between
just because God knows what it would take to change your mind, just because I know that if someone is fiending for crack, and if I just give him the crack, he'll do whatever I say. He'll go rob the house. That doesn't mean right that me not giving him the crack is like somehow evil.
Yeah, and that's where we're kind of drawing
Well,
a
by
really
the way,
fine line
y'all wanna
between. We're
please-
drawing a bit
please-
of a fine line between manipulation and persuasion. Like there's a.
Well, there
there's
is a fine line between them.
I would say it's kind of more of a blurred line, but the example that I'm using isn't along the lines of giving a crackhead to
Real quick,
crackhead crack.
I want to clarify something about persuade. By the way, it's okay if you stream, Arden. Anyway, I want
What
to
I was
clarify.
saying is, like, if y'all wanted to see high level gameplay, you can look at the stream.
Oh, okay. All right. Anyway, back to the persuasion point. About persuasion, I don't think persuasion necessarily circumvents free will. But I do think that the level of persuasion God has access to, like God's full persuasive power, would circumvent free will because
Of course.
God would only be using it specifically to prevent a human from exercising their free will in a certain way. So he is literally using his persuasive power as a loophole
I
to
disagree.
prevent reactions.
I disagree because.
And when we have this
Real quick,
conversation, we also need to
real quick,
define what
yeah.
we mean by free will.
Yeah, I can do all those things. I was about to do all those things. By saying what you just
Go
said,
ahead.
by saying what you just said, you limit God's power or his omniscience. And the other thing to define free will, I'll get to in a minute, is that free will defined as the ability to act differently.
Okay.
By saying that God, it is within.
But that's not what true free will would be. True free will would be able to act in any way that you see fit, which is
the ability to.
that's real free will.
The ability to act differently than the way that I'm about to behave. Like I'm about to continue this conversation. I have the ability to leave this conversation, but I choose not to. That's free will. And
Okay, sure.
So then I ask, how does God deciding not to exercise his persuasive power mean he either isn't all knowing or not all powerful?
by not exercising, he has infinite knowledge. He knew what it would have taken for Cain to not commit sin, but he chose not to do it anyway. By saying that, by saying that it is within his limits, and which would actually be taking away our free will and
He
our
could
choice.
do it.
Yeah, he could do it. Then, by saying that he could, but he chose not
So
to, would
because
limit
God
his,
can
would limit,
destroy the
by
whole
saying that God,
universe at any
by saying
point?
that God could have done it but chose not to, shows that he's not omnibenevolent.
So because God can change an apple into a pear at any moment, but he chooses not to, does that mean he's not all powerful?
Yes, dude.
Of course not.
No.
It's more. It's
No.
more like this. It's more like this. If changing the apple to a pear was ultimately going to cure cancer 1,000 years from now, and he chose not to, then it would make him not omnibenevolent to an extent. And it's like this. If I have the ability, if there is a little girl drowning in a pool, and I have the ability to jump in and save her, I'm fully in my power to do so, and I choose not to, I would be evil, wouldn't
Right.
I? That would be a sin. That would be absolutely.
But now
Yeah.
you're moving the goalposts. You're
No,
moving
that
the
was the-
goalposts from all powerful
That was
to
the-
immoral.
No, that
You
was
moved the goalpost.
There's a symmetry breaker with God, though, for that.
Actually, the goalpost.
No,
was
I have to
actually,
address-
no, hold on, Kay. No, hold on,
Yeah.
Kay. I want to address what Kay said, and then I'll let you go, Dodd. It's that he actually moved the goalpost in the first place. I said that God is. You're either limiting God's all powerfulness or his all omnibenevolence, and then you actually shifted it and said, "How is it limiting his all knowingness?" I didn't say that. I said he's either not all
That's
good
not what
or
I
he's
said at
not,
all.
because we're arguing the problem of evil. His omniscience isn't really what's in question.
Okay, so I
Okay,
want
I
to
think you
address
lost
that.
the plot, but sure.
I want to address that thing about negligence. The reason it would be evil for you to just let a girl drown is because you have all humans have a responsibility to each other. As God says, love your neighbor as yourself, right? However, God has a different relationship to individual humans as humans have to each other. God's ability to act is it's not God's ability. God's decision to act is based on whether or not we want him to be active in our lives. So, for example, God allowed demons to convince people to worship them and establish all the religions on earth. because those humans decided they didn't want to worship God. God allowed them to worship other deities, and he only worked with the humans who wanted to worship him, namely Israel. So God chooses to act based on whether or not the humans want him to act. To give an analogy, God is sort of like a landlord who owns an apartment building, and someone moves into the apartment and they decide, I don't want to pay the electric bill, so I'm going to turn the heat off. Now, if that person in there then freezes to death that winter because there's a blizzard, that's not on the landlord, because the person refused what the landlord had to offer that would have saved him from dying during that blizzard.
And then who set that system up that God isn't responsible for his own creation?
God kind of just is. He doesn't set things up generally.
He created.
As Thomas Aquinas says, God is existence.
God created the universe.
God's essence is existence.
Yes,
so if God has
created, God created the universe. God's plan for the universe prior to creation, if there really is a prior to creation. Oh, God, because God is immutable, he always had his plan. He never came up with the idea. It's not like God could change the plan if he wanted to. It's just there. God just is.
He set up the immaterial systems, such as our morality. There's a objective morality according to God. There's an objective way that humans ought to treat each other according to God. There's an objective way that God ought to treat his creation, his humans. The relationship that he has to them is a system that he set up. And if he set up, that's what logically follows by saying that God has a certain relationship to humans, which is different than the relationship that humans have to each other. He set that system up.
Yeah, but that's not. And it doesn't follow. It doesn't follow from there being something that God set it up like that. It could just be that God is, so it follows. If, for example,
then
sin.
Okay, then I can.
Like sin, we know God didn't create evil. Because, for example, evil is not actually a thing. It's the absence of God. God didn't set it up that way. It's kind of just how it works. There's God, there's not God is sin.
Yes, then I can tackle it from that perspective too. Then it was of God's nature. If it just is God, then it is God's nature to make it so that humans are allowed to sin and suffer and commit evil. It is of his nature to not intervene with most sins.
That's of his loving nature.
Yeah, that'd be more accurate.
That's not
God is not.
It's of his loving nature to allow us to make our own decisions, and that means allowing us to make evil choices.
Mm-hmm.
But he gives us plenty of options, and he gives us all kinds of ways to not choose that. Like he says in the scriptures, he writes the law of God on our hearts, so we all kind of have this intrinsic knowledge that, like, you know, fundamental morals, like, you know, you don't rape kids, or like you don't murder people, or you don't steal from your mother or your brother, right?
What?
Like we all have this in us, and then God gives us grace. So he gives us the ability to overcome. So actually, Saint Cyril talks about this in his some of his teachings.
Cyril.
He basically says that the devil. Yeah, so he basically says that the devil, what he does is he whispers in your ear. He whispers and suggests something to you. But it's up to you whether you choose to do that thing or not. But it's only by God's grace that we can ever refuse Lucifer, because Lucifer is obviously an angel. He's a divine being. He's way smarter than us. He could manipulate us if it wasn't for God.
Right, and getting into the papacy is a little bit different, or like into the reliability of the church fathers, because Cyril of Alexandria did some pretty fucked up shit.
I mean, that's not necessary to go into apologetics for Cyril.
Yeah,
back to the problem of
every person did. Paul did some messed up stuff too. That doesn't mean he's wrong.
Okay, my point is, God. So the argument that God is being negligent by not intervening doesn't work, because he has a different relationship with us, and you can't blame him for it because God did not volitionally set that up. What
that makes it analogous to is the idea of the little girl drowning in the pool, and I choose not to intervene. It is of my nature to just go ahead and let that little girl drown, in the same way that it is of God's nature to go ahead and allow us to sin and suffer and commit evil and kill each other, and just not do anything and not do anything about it. That is of God's nature, and that's the God that you have to accept.
Well, it's not that it's not that he didn't do anything about it. He did a lot about it. He came down and sacrificed his son so that we could experience paradise in the next life, even if we are, even if we experience hell here. we can have paradise in the next life through belief in Jesus Christ.
That's not,
And on top of that, I would say that part of this, I think it, and I don't mean this to be insulting, but I do think a large part of atheism and agnosticism is
It's not
this.
amazing.
It is, well, he's obviously not a theist, so and anti-theist,
He's a base deist.
He's a theist.
He's a deist.
He's a deist. Okay, so well, it's funny that you're a deist, but you're kind of thinking in a way that most atheists think, which I think is very
I take the good with the bad.
it's very it's almost megalomaniac. It's almost like a megalomaniac kind of thing, where like
Do you know what the fuck it
the
is?
atheist or
That's like
it's almost like when the atheist or the agnostic puts themselves on the level of God. He puts himself in the judgment seat
I'm gonna
and
stop
says,
him right there.
"Okay, there's this
I'm gonna stop.
divine
I'm gonna
being."
I'm gonna go ahead and stop him right there.
Hold on.
No, I'm gonna go ahead and
I'm
stop him
not
right
gonna
there.
lie.
I'm not
I'm not
gonna.
gonna lie.
I'm not claiming to be a deity. I'm not claiming to be fucking God. I am.
I
However,
didn't say you are. I said that you put yourself on the seat. You fail to
Yes.
realize that if this
He's not
deity
really
does
doing
exist,
Absolutely
to
not.
be fair to Bubba, he's doing an internal.
no, he
critique.
is.
Yeah, so he's granting
He-
all God's premises and asking God, how are you being consistent with your own premises?
But we need to respond to him in kind too. But we also need to respond to him in the way God responded to Job. God did not rationalize himself to Job. He showed him that he was God, and that Job, as a small man made from dust, cannot possibly conceive of all the different moral questions and quandaries that come into why God does the things he does. Now, I'm not saying that means that we should just not explain to the atheist or deist or whatever at all why God may do a thing, but it's important to explain. But it's important to explain to these people that ultimately
these people.
it's about whether this being exists or not. Because if it does, its knowledge is so far above ours that to question it is kind of fallacious in a sense.
Well, as a non-Christian, I couldn't care less about fallacies. And the thing is,
What?
I couldn't care less about fallacies. Oh no, not fallacies.
Fallacies is not a Christian thing.
Right. My bad. I was thinking of heresies.
Okay.
I was thinking of heresies.
Oh yeah, no. I'm saying fallacies.
But the last point that you made that is worth addressing was about Jesus. Jesus dying on the cross doesn't solve the problem of evil, and also mostly because Jesus' death on the cross wasn't justice.
Sure.
What's the problem of evil? God doesn't exist because bad thing happened.
I wanna circle back to where we were. Okay, you kind of took us off base. Okay, back to what we were adjusting your hair. Back to what we were talking about, Bubba. Sorry, it's just sorry. It just throws me off when you take your headphones off. I feel like you better. My God, I feel like you better leave anyway. So back to the point. Okay. So God, because he's a relational being, and that's just how he is. It's not a volitional thing he chose to be. Because God is a relational being, and he wants relationships with us. He has to grant us free will, otherwise there is no relationship. You just have a bunch of robots to serve him, which is not fulfilling for him or for us, because there would be no us. So he in accordance with his nature creates the universe the way it is. Now, to specifically be clear about your problem of evil objection, your argument is your argument is that allowing sin makes God no longer omnibenevolent?
Pretty much. I can run down a summary. It's that the nature of the Christian God is to allow us to commit evil, and that is certainly not omnibenevolence. And the other thing was, in order to solve the problem of evil, either it is perfectly within God's nature, since he's all powerful, to intervene with every sin, or to or just do the much more simple option and admit that God is not omnibenevolent. Just that he's the most good, or that he's very good, whatever the case. He's the most. It's like that's totally fine. But to say that he's infinitely good,
And what standard of good are you judging him by?
Presupposing that there is an objective moral law, which I don't believe though. But for the sake of argument.
Okay. So then so Bubba, then I have this question. So How does God's nature being to allow us to commit evil make him no longer omnibenevolent? How is he not all good for allowing people who aren't him to do evil?
Under the idea of negligence that we were arguing with the little girl in the pool, and
Okay.
I could
So
pull
it's
up,
okay.
I could pull up a Bible
Sounds
word,
good.
and I could pull up a Bible verse that specifically says that like I can either go Old Testament or New Testament, the two great commandments from Jesus, or an old commandment from
Love your
Moses.
neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself.
Yep.
God has a different relationship to us. It doesn't apply to him like one to one.
What's up, Mama? I'm back, baby mama. Baby mama.
For example, oh, for example, do you think it is immoral for God to kill someone?
Yes.
Okay, why?
Because then you would be hypocritical.
Okay. So then I have to explain something to you. Okay, the law that God has given to humans, those word for word commands are not what He follows. What God follows are principles, which are what those word for word commands are drawn from. So
then you have
principle behind.
then you have a master-slave dynamic like in Islam with God, and not a loving relationship with God. It's like a dictator. Think of, I am Kim Jong-un, and I command all my people to not kill each other, not lie to each other, not steal from each other. But it's totally okay if I break into your house and I kill your wife, and I steal your stuff and leave. It's totally okay for me to do that, but it's not okay for you to do that.
Okay, watch this. Okay. If, let's say, you have a parent, right? And your parent gives you an allowance of $15 a week, right? Okay. And then let's say you get bad grades and you misbehave in school, and the parent says, "Okay, I'm taking my allowance back." Did she steal from you?
No, but it's also not analogous.
Okay, how's that not analogous?
Talking money and currency to as if it's analogous to like hypocrisy and moral truths.
Yeah, so the analogy is not between money, currency, and moral truths. The analogy is between what God gives us and what your parent can give you. So if your parent gives you an allowance, you misbehave, and she takes it back. She's not stealing from you because the stuff was always hers. She just delegated it to you. So if God, who owns everyone, says, I don't want my things destroyed. So since you guys are capable of destroying each other, don't do that. If he decides that he wants to destroy one of his things, he can do that.
Then the thing is, Christianity doesn't exactly believe in karma in the way that you're describing. Christianity doesn't have a what goes around comes around theology
No,
about
it's not that God. It's not that God like God doesn't even have to kill someone to punish them. He could just decide, I don't want them living on Earth anymore. I want to move them somewhere else.
Sorry, what? He doesn't want them living on Earth anymore, but he's not going to kill them.
No, he could just
No.
he could
From his
just
perspective, it's the afterlife. Right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's not like
So they wouldn't be living?
it's not done.
Yeah.
You're always living. Like no matter what, you're just getting transferred to a different realm.
Yeah, death is a mode of transit between different realms.
The problem with trying to argue the afterlife to solve the problem of evil is that it is completely...
I'm not arguing the afterlife to solve the problem of evil. My point is, how God acts on his principles is different than how humans act on God's principles, because humans and God are different things. They have different responsibilities. The president has the responsibility to pass good laws. You don't. Sorry, not to pass, to sign good laws. You don't. If you go to the White House and you see a bill on his desk that's bad, it's not your responsibility to veto it. You don't have that power. You're not the president.
I'm looking at something. Was a belief that God relates to humans in a unique and transcendental way, distinct from how humans relate to each other. We are the clay, you are the potter, the work is of his hand. Got you. Creator-creation relationship.
That's all over the Bible. Like, for example, in Isaiah, it says that, hold on. God created. Oh, Yeah, this is the reason God does what he does, like in Job. He makes this point that God is sovereign. So because God is sovereign, how he acts on his principles is different than how we would, because we are ontologically different things. Have different responsibilities. Since God owns, so for example, since my life belongs to God, if someone kills me, they've robbed God. That's why murder is wrong. But since my life belongs to God, if God kills me, that's his right, because my life belongs to God. It's his life. He gave it to me. He can decide, I don't want you to be alive anymore. I'm moving you somewhere else.
The problem with that line of thinking is that it's not consistent with reality. It's that people that sin and blaspheme God and are Satanists and devil worshippers 24 hours a day for 60 years of their life, usually nothing bad happens to them. Like, they just go about their life living normally, and the only argument that you can make is that they're living in their own sin, which is punishment of itself, or they're going to suffer in the afterlife.
God doesn't consistently punish people.
Then it's an inconsistent God who sometimes doesn't punish bad things. Therefore, he would not be omnibenevolent.
I mean, like, you could say it's apparently inconsistent, but the reason he doesn't consistently punish people, I know. The reason he doesn't consistently punish people is not because he's acting arbitrarily. The reason he doesn't consistently punish people is because not everyone is in an agreement with him where he can just punish them. Like, for example, the reason he would judge Israel all the time is because Israel agreed to keep God's law.
And that makes
sense. So when they didn't do it, God was like, okay, this is the punishment because we agreed to this, and then you're violating the agreement. But for example, the pagans in Greece, he left them alone because they didn't have an agreement.
Right, and that makes no sense. That makes no sense. Here's why: is because why did God selectively judge Israel so much? Probably because the people that were writing down about their history, the people that were writing about the history of Yahweh was the people that lived in Israel. It's way more consistent to say that the reason that God is judging Israel so much is because the Israelites are the one recording them, not because Yahweh is punishing the whole world. It's because, like, the Native Americans who were living in America at the time didn't believe in Yahweh. They never heard of Yahweh, so they weren't recording anything about Yahweh. In the same way that the people in Hindustan or modern-day India, they were believing in their pantheistic religion, so they never heard of Yahweh. They don't know what Yahweh is. They can't tell it's more consistent to say that the reason that Israel's getting punished isn't because of God, isn't because God loves them more. It's because the Israelites are recording their history.
So no, but I'm not arguing that because the Bible mentions Israel being punished that's no. I'm saying, like, historically, if you look at history, like you said, there are people who are violating God's law in places, right? Like, for example, for hundreds of years, the ancient Egyptians ate pork. A violation of God's law. And yet he did not smite them one time. For hundreds of thousands of years, millions of cultures around the world the Sabbath, and yet he did not smite them. So, internal critique. The reason he didn't do that is because they are not in covenant with him. The whole reason he punished Israel is because they were in violation of their covenant with him. This is what it says in the Bible. So it's not that I'm just making something up. The Bible is clear that God does things in response to covenants. Like it says, I believe Psalms, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them.
Do you think
if you're in covenant with God, then he acts towards your benefit?
Do you think that God only made 2 covenants in the entire existence of humanity?
No, he made plenty more. He tells you which covenants he made in the Bible. He made a covenant with the Philistines. He tells you.
Yeah, sure. The old covenant. I'm referencing specifically like the old covenant and the new covenant.
Yeah, those 2. Yeah, he did make those.
Do you think that he made a covenant with the people in Hindustan?
No, he doesn't reference one.
Why not?
Because he doesn't tell us he made a covenant with the people in Hindustan. He tells us the other people he made covenants with. In Amos 9:7 and Zephaniah 3:10, he tells you other people he made covenants.
Yeah, that's the issue. It's like he's the only people that apparently that he ever made covenants with are the 12 prophets and the other prophets that recorded that he made covenants. I know the major prophets and the 12 prophets. The Amos is one of the
I
12
want you to
prophets.
Can you read Amos 9:7 for me, please?
I read it in my head. Oh, people of Israel, I did not bring people of Israel into Egypt. Yeah, the Philistines and those four tribes.
No, the Philistines are not Israelites.
Oh,
They're enemies.
Yeah, sure.
See? Philistines and Syrians. So God is telling you, I made a covenant with the Cushites, O people of Israel. I made a covenant with the Philistines, and I made a covenant with the Syrians. So he's made covenants with other groups of people. So we know who he's also made covenants with. He tells us.
What were those covenants?
Based on the information, they were probably similar covenants to Israel. God is consistent. That's why he says, did I not bring up Israel from the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Captor, and the Syrians from Ker? So he probably gave the Philistines and the Arameans a similar law, delivered them with a similar figure, etc., etc. Like, if you look at Genesis, and you look at, like, the Noahide laws in comparisons to the Ten Commandments, you can see the parallels. So God is giving consistent relation to all the people he's meeting.
Dodd, you can't have it both ways. You can't say that God is inconsistently punishing people, but then he's also giving consistent covenants to people.
The reason his punishments are apparently inconsistent is because people are not consistently entering covenant with him. Punishment is based on if you're in covenant. Because humans inconsistently make covenant with God, there's only like a few people who ever did. He inconsistently punishes humans because not everyone is under his jurisdiction all the time.
Not everyone is under God's all-powerful, omnipresent, all-knowing, omnibenevolent covenant. His omnibenevolent nature. God created us.
Everyone's under his nature, not everyone's under his jurisdiction.
He's omnipresent. Why wouldn't they be?
Because they did not agree to that.
They didn't agree to it. Why? Did they not agree to it because they heard of him and outright rejected him, or is it more consistent with reality to say that they never fucking heard of Yahweh?
Again, you're doing an internal critique. That's not the case in Christianity. According to the Christian worldview, the ancestors of all people met him. They saw him over the altar. They heard him speak to their dad, Noah.
I don't think that's internal critique, right? People on North Sentinel Island even today have never heard of Jesus. They never heard of the Old Covenant, the New Covenant, Moses, Noah, Abraham.
Their ancestor Shem 100% did.
Okay,
they don't know.
It's fine if they're. You could say every single character in the Bible ever mentioned, even the ones in the chapters where God isn't mentioned, like in Esther. I'm fine with believing that every single person mentioned in the Bible has heard of Yahweh, God, and the covenant and all that stuff. What I'm not okay with saying, and I'm sure that you wouldn't be okay with saying either, is that there are hundreds of tribes throughout history who have never heard of the God of Moses or the God of Abraham.
Yes, well, there are tribes, or remote tribes, that have never heard of the God of Israel because their ancestors rejected him and didn't tell them about it.
Then that's not justice, because God would be punishing people who are not under his covenant because of the sins of their ancient ancestors.
God doesn't punish them. God has never punished pygmies for eating pork.
Are they going to make it to heaven?
I don't know. Maybe.
Do you think that they are?
In the
Bible,
it says in our ignorance God winks. So if any pygmies go to hell, it wouldn't be because they just didn't know. It'd be because whatever standard of Paul says that our consciences will stand witness against us. So whatever revelation from God they did have that they didn't follow, that's what they would be held to. So for example, God did allow various gods to rule these people. So if the pygmies did not worship their gods, as far as their gods serve the true God, then that probably would be the standard they're judged off of. I don't know. I don't really know how God's going to judge those people, but we know for a fact that he won't judge them because they just didn't know. The Bible says in our ignorance God winks.
2 questions. First question, quick answer, is that how can those people possibly have known of any such divine revelation from God, the God of Christianity, if they'd never heard of him?
Well, like I said, the revelation would have been through the gods that God assigned to rule over them. Whoever's in the pygmy.
That's answering a different question, but I kind of wanted to ask the next question because it's more important. It was that,
okay.
Shit. Don't tell me I just forgot. Fuck. Right.
Struggle.
Yeah, it was to the best of your judgment. The people who have whose ancestors perhaps received a revelation. If my great-great-grandfather received a revelation from God and rejected it, and they chose not to teach me, and I'd never heard of God, to the best of your judgment, under the new covenant, I reject Jesus. I never heard of Jesus, and I'm gonna go ahead and commit Christian sins willy-nilly, because I never heard of them. I don't know what they are.
Right.
Am I gonna go to hell?
Not on the basis that you didn't know about Jesus.
No, if I was a completely evil psychopath and the perspective of a Christian, of the objective Christian moral law, and I just thought that killing and stealing and lying to people was totally okay. Am I going to be judged for those things? Because I never heard of Jesus in the objective Christian
Why
moral
would you
law.
ever believe in Christianity, you fucking dumbass? You're a dumbass.
The reason you would be judged is because you haven't chosen God. You wouldn't be subject to any sort of punishment on the basis of what you did because you didn't know it was wrong. The only reason you would cease to exist is because you're just not aligned with God. How that works.
So far, in order to reduce this into what it truly is so far, you've told me that God is inconsistent with the way that he judges people because of the way that they have some people that
Because of humans.
because some people are under the same covenant as God, and so for whatever reason, I think that no reason is justified for an omnibenevolent, omnipowerful God for him to not be consistent with the way that he judges people. Some people are going to go ahead and be psychopaths who had never heard of God and are going to commit sin. They're going to be psychopaths who kill, murder, steal, and lie. And they are going to make it into heaven on it's possible for them to make it to heaven on the basis that they don't understand the Christian objective moral law.
No, they're not going to heaven.
They're not going to heaven on the basis that they didn't know who God ever was.
Yes, they're not going to any place on the basis of how much they know, how much they knew. They'd be going based on, are you going to choose God or are you not going to choose God? So when they appear on the day of judgment, when they're like, you know what, I was a psychopath murderer, I want nothing to do with all those happy people in the sky right now. Well, they're going to stay on Earth. They want nothing to do with the happy people in the sky right now. God is respecting their decision.
And he's then giving an eternal punishment of hell. Eternal punishment, yes?
I'm an annihilationist. Well, it's technically eternal.
Hell is eternal, yes? And if I'm a psychopathic knife-wielding murderer who has heard of God, I'm going to receive eternal punishment in hell, yes?
Yes.
Then God would be giving me an eternal punishment for a finite crime.
Well, the reason it's eternal is simply because you made a decision.
Under
Yes,
let's say I live for 70 years, then I'm going to spend an eternity. We're talking infinite. We're talking infinites here. An infinite amount of time for a crime that I only committed for 70 years.
Okay, I just want to. What do you think is going to happen during all that time? You're going to be burning?
I'm going to have what Christians describe as ultimate separation from God. Hell is as worse as it could possibly be from the Christian world.
Right, so you just won't exist. You won't be experiencing anything. Just be gone.
If I have all separation from God, then I'm deprived of everything that is good. That means from the Christian world, I'm not going to cease to exist in hell. Revelation refutes that. Revelation refutes that. It's that I'm going to. Revelation refutes that. Like, I'm still gonna exist in hell. I'm not just gonna eternally be dead like in the way the atheists say. I'm not just gonna cease to exist. You still have a soul. People in hell are eternally suffering. The only way to suffer is to have an existence to begin with.
Your soul gets destroyed in hell. Jesus says, "Do not fear the one who can destroy the body but cannot destroy the soul, but fear the one who can destroy the body and the soul in hell."
Yeah, destroy doesn't mean disintegrate into nothingness. Destroy would just mean
that's kind of what it means.
Under what circumstance?
Under any circumstance where the word destroy is used.
Yeah, what's the in what context are you going to say that destroy here means to disintegrate out of existence? It doesn't mean to cease to exist. Destroy in the way that in the
God like a human, like for example, if I destroy a building, the building is still there. It's just in tatters, right? It's in all these different parts.
Yeah, it still exists.
But right, but God is more powerful than like a wrecking ball. So God could literally eviscerate the atoms. Right?
Oh, then this is perhaps we're talking into a different realm in heaven and hell, but still that breaks the second law of thermodynamics.
When Jesus says who can destroy body and soul, so he's saying that no, I can. And remember, he's talking about how much more powerful he is than these mere mortals who can merely kill you, who can merely mortally wound you. So he's talking about how powerful he is that he can destroy the body and the soul. To me, the context shows he's talking about disintegration. He could just cause you to cease to exist.
And then we're getting into subjective interpretation of the Bible, which is a completely different big problem with Christianity.
According to the Strong's Concordance, apolumi means to destroy utterly.
Fully destroy doesn't just mean like disintegrate the atoms. It doesn't mean like, or at least it doesn't. And I would be equally as correct in saying that destroy could mean in the context of like when I'm torturing a person and then I'm destroying their soul, right? Like that would be I could accurately say that I am taking apart that person's soul. I am destroying it. Hi Yasmin, love you. And right. And you could also be equally correct in saying
I love you too.
Mwah. Did you? Shit. And that's getting into the problem of subjective interpretation of the Bible, which is a completely different, like I could say.
Well, yeah. Again, you're doing an internal critique of my worldview, so you kind of have to grant my premises if we're gonna go at this.
I suppose it's just like I kind of think I reject your premise altogether by saying that destroy.
Right, you can reject my premises, but can I at least show you that all my premises are consistent before we get into me backing all of them up?
When you said that, sure, you gotta try and argue that Christianity is consistent when you already said that God doesn't judge people consistently.
Yeah, the reason I said and why and what is the reason God doesn't judge people consistently?
Because some people aren't under the same covenant and they reject God.
Right. So if you are not under God's jurisdiction, he can't judge you because it'd be a violation of his principles.
If I'm a Christian and you're a Christian, we both commit the same exact sin. Like let's say we both steal $100 from the jewelry store.
Yes.
Are we going to be judged exactly the same?
God under the Christian covenant there are no curses like there were under the Israelite covenant.
I didn't ask anything about curses.
We won't be temporally punished. It just won't happen.
We won't be atemporally punished? You mean
eternally? We will not be. No, we won't be temporally.
We're going to be eternally punished? Because that's the opposite of temporally.
When I say temporally, I mean we will not be punished in this life directly.
And then that's the other problem. That's the other separate issue with the problem of evil. You can't prove or you can't falsify or prove heaven and hell's existence.
That's besides the point. You're doing an internal critique.
You can't prove heaven and hell. That's an internal critique.
Well, that's an external critique.
It's like this. The Bible says heaven and hell exist, right?
Yes.
How do you know?
I don't.
But
I mean, I don't. I've never been there. There's no documentation from there. So I believe heaven and hell exists because the credible source, Jesus Christ, says so. All I got.
And then the other critique is still true that you haven't responded to at all, which is heaven and hell, well, hell specifically, is an eternal punishment for a finite crime. And then you're just saying that you're trying to kind of shoo that by saying that, well, my soul gets ultimately disintegrated into nothingness. However, it's eternally disintegrated into nothingness, which is still an infinite crime for an finite. It's an infinite punishment for a finite crime, regardless.
Okay. I want to go through this with you. Okay. If you reject God, you reject everything that is good and everything God offers, including your existence, right?
All right, we're gonna have to wrap this up. Let's kind of like make closing statements for about 5 minutes. The last thing that I said was that you still haven't addressed that hell is a infinite punishment for a finite crime.
Right. So I just want to walk you through this thing. You reject everything God has to offer, which includes the sustenance of your existence, and you will cease to exist. It is an infinite punishment, not because God is volitionally deciding to make you to make you suffer this long. That's just what happens when you don't respond to God, when you do that to God. So, for example, you can have my goodness. You can have like longer punishments for other temporal violations. So, for example, if I don't drink water, what's gonna happen to me?
Die.
You're gonna die, right? Okay, but me not drinking water was only a crime I committed for 3 days, and yet I'm going to be dead for like years on end, right?
Yeah.
Okay, is the water being unjust to me?
Water is not like God. Water doesn't have a consciousness or a mind.
I know, but has the water committed an injustice because I refuse to partake of it?
The answer is no, but it's also still not analogous. Water doesn't have a mind or a
It
consciousness.
it is analogous because water is a source of life in the natural world. God is the source of life, I suppose metaphysically you could say. So if you stop partaking of God, you will die of spiritual thirst and cease to exist. Not because God is punishing you, but because it's just kind of how God works. God is life. So you need to drink the life.
It's your refutation ultimately comes down to the analogy of the water, which I still don't think is analogous.
All right.
But no, it's fine. But in this case, you're saying that God will eternally punish you and send you to a place of ultimate separation
Again,
from
he's
good,
not punished.
from send you to a place with infinite suffering, where apparently your soul gets destroyed eternally for a finite lifetime, and it's just because it's the way that God is.
No, again, God is not punishing you. You're not drinking the water, so you're gonna die of thirst. That's kind of how that works.
I know. And then if God was ultimately just, then even in after my finite lifetime, I would have the opportunity. I would have the opportunity. I would have the opportunity to receive water, and I would have the opportunity
So
to not thirst.
So God should force feed Himself to you.
That's not at all what I said. Complete straw man.
So what's the solution? If you don't drink the water, you will die of thirst. How does God get you?
Is the last question I'll answer. It's that ultimately God would know, all the way back to the beginning. God knows what it would take for me to ultimately, in this case, drink from the water, but He chooses not to tell me and chooses not to persuade me. Persuasion is not the negation of free will. We've agreed to that in the beginning. And I have to go. Bye.